Hello students, my name is Abhishek Sudhir and I am an assistant professor at the Jindal Global Law School. Welcome to the UGC's EPG Pathshala project. This is paper number 4 on civil and political rights. We'll be looking at module 23, laws governing prisoners' rights in India. In India, the idea of rights of prisoners was long suppressed under colonial rule and has only recently emerged in the public discourse. The Constitution of India confers a number of fundamental rights upon citizens. The Indian state is also a signatory to various international instruments on human rights. In India, prisoners' rights have also developed significantly by case laws in which the Supreme Court has liberally interpreted fundamental rights. The Supreme Court has also held that laws should be tested on grounds of reasonableness and non-arbitrariness. This module will, however, confine itself to the laws and the statute books, rather than focus on the interpretation of the Supreme Court, which we will consider in the next module. What are the learning outcomes of this module? The purpose of this module is to give the students an overview of the laws governing the rights of prisoners in India. And it's also aimed at helping the students understand the manner in which prisoners' rights are safeguarded by India's laws. Existing laws in India lean towards the reformative theory, right? The reformative theory, which essentially means that the purpose of the prison system should be to reform the offender, basically, okay? To rehabilitate, reform the offender and the prisoner. In progressive states, provision is made for the prevention of habitual offenders, essentially. Borstal schools have been set up. A provision is made for a system of probation for first offenders. This theory, once again, right, is adopted in the case of juvenile offenders, right? And India is no different. The oldest legislation on the subject in India is the Reformatory Schools Act 1890, which aims at preventing the depraved and delinquent children from becoming confirmed criminals in coming years. It applies to children under the age of 15 years. The Reformatory Schools Act applies to children under 15 years. The Reformatory Schools Act has been extensively amended in its application to various states by the respective state legislatures, basically. Here you're looking at some pictures of these reformative schools, right? The schools were Borstals, essentially, where children who have committed offences under the age of 15 are essentially reformed and rehabilitated and are given an education. Okay, now, the government of India in 1960 passed the Children Act, which applies to the Union territories. This act was amended in 1978. The amendment broadened the scope of the Children Act. The Probation of Offenders Act 1958 has also been passed with a similar object in view. About the Probation of Offenders Act, the Supreme Court has observed in Ratanlal v. State of Punjab that the Act is a milestone in the progress of the modern liberal trend of reform in the field of penology. So you also have probation, essentially, right? What is probation? We're going to come to that very shortly. For now, let me just give you a quick overview, right? And we're in the middle of that overview of laws, right, that govern prisoners' rights, essentially. Section 27 of the CRPC, the Code of Criminal Procedure, provides that any offence not punishable with death or imprisonment for life committed by any person who at the date when he appears or is brought before the court is under the age of 16 years may be tried by the court of a chief judicial magistrate or by any court especially empowered under the Children Act 1960 or any other law for the time being enforced providing for the treatment, training and rehabilitation of youthful offenders. Section 360 of the CRPC empowers the court to order the release on probation of good conduct or after admonition. The law relating to probation of offenders in India is contained, as I've said, in the Probation Offenders Act 1958, which is a comprehensive legislation on probation law, and that complements the provisions of the CRPC, essentially. Right now, in the case of Ramji Misar versus State of Bihar, in the old Code of Criminal Procedure 1898, the court observed, the purpose of release of youthful offenders on probation is to stop their conversion into stubborn criminals as a result of their association with hardened criminals of mature age. Modern criminal jurisprudence recognizes that no one is a born criminal and that a good many crimes are the result of socio-economic milieu. Although not much can be done for hardened criminals, a considerable emphasis has been laid on bringing about reform of juveniles who are not guilty of very serious offences by preventing their association with mature criminals. This, right, technique of reformation, right, is essentially the underlying principle of the Probation of Offenders Act. Here you're looking at an animation of probation. Essentially, right, probation, essentially how does it work? In practice, right, the prisoner is released and he is released on good conduct. An undertaking is taken from the prisoner and he is told that the moment he violates any provisions of this undertaking, right, the moment he goes back to his criminal ways, he will immediately be rearrested. Therefore, essentially, a criminal is given a second chance, right, and it is a chance that he should not essentially waste. That is the hope. And the hope is that during his time in prison, right, he has been reformed and rehabilitated to such an extent that he will be able to appreciate the value of his freedom, basically, on probation, right. So now, we come to the crux, the gist of this module. That's prison laws and reforms in India. First, let's start with a brief background and overview of India's prison laws and its origins and evolution. Right? Now, the modern prison system in India originated, right, with the Minute by Thomas Babington Macaulay in 1835. A committee named the Prison Disciplinary Committee was appointed, which submitted its report in 1838, basically. The committee recommended increased rigorousness of treatment while rejecting all humanitarian needs and reforms for prisoners. Following the recommendations of the Macaulay Committee between 1836 to 1838, central prisons were constructed in India from 1846, many of these prisons still standing today. Contemporary prison administration in India is thus a legacy of British rule. It is based on the notion that the best criminal code can be of little use to a community unless there is good machinery for the infliction of punishments. In 1864, the Second Commission of Inquiry into Jail Management and Discipline made similar recommendations as the 1836 Committee. In addition, this commission made some specific suggestions regarding accommodation for prisoners, improvement in diet, clothing, bedding, and medical care. In 1877, a conference of experts met to inquire into prison administration. The conference proposed the enactment of a prison law and a draft bill was prepared. In 1888, the Fourth Jail Commission was appointed. On the basis of its recommendation, a consolidated prison bill was formulated. Provisions regarding jail offences and punishment were specifically examined by a conference of experts on jail management. In 1894, the draft bill became law with the assent of the then Governor General of India. That draft bill became law and became the Prisons Act of 1894, which we still follow to this very day in 2015. It is the Prisons Act 1894, essentially, that the basis of the present jail management and administration system operates in India. This act has hardly undergone any substantial change. There has hardly been a substantial change to the Prisons Act 1894. However, the process of review of the prison problems in India continued even after this. In the report of the Indian Jail Committee 1919 to 1920, for the first time in the history of prisons, reformation and rehabilitation of offenders were identified as the objectives of the prison administration. So this was quite revolutionary, right? All of these developments are taking place under the British Raj. You have to understand that the prison system was essentially run by the British, not to reform or rehabilitate offenders, but essentially to keep troublemakers in prison, right? Because the national movement had essentially taken off. Several committees and commissions appointed by both the central and state governments after independence also have emphasized the humanization of the conditions in the prisons. The need for completely overhauling and consolidating the laws relating to prisons has been constantly highlighted by these various committees, but unfortunately not much has happened. Even the government of now, essentially state governments have their own rules for the day-to-day administration of prisons, upkeep and maintenance of prisoners, and prescribing procedures. So it's essentially the prison system in India, the driving force behind it are the state governments rather than the union government. In 1951, the government of India invited the UN expert on correctional work, Dr. W.C. Peckless, right, to undertake a study on prison administration and to suggest policy reforms. Right? The experts' report titled Jail Administration in India made a plea for transforming jails into reformation centers. The expert also recommended the revision of outdated jail manuals. In 1952, the 8th Conference of the Inspector General of Prisons also supported the recommendations of Dr. Peckless regarding prison reform. Accordingly, the Government of India appointed the All India Jail Manual Committee in 1957 to prepare a model prison manual. The committee submitted its report in 1960. The report made a forceful plea for formulating a uniform policy and latest methods relating to jail administration, probation, aftercare, juvenile and remand homes. Essentially, the report suggested amendments in the Prison Act 1894 to provide a legal base for correctional work, and thus was born the Model Prison Manual. The committee prepared the Model Prison Manual and presented it to the Government of India in 1960 for implementation. right? The MPM 1960 is the guiding principle on the basis of which the present Indian prison management is governed. On the lines of the MPM, the Ministry of Home Affairs in 1972 appointed a working group on prisons. It brought out in its report the need for a national policy on prisons. It also made an important recommendation with regard to classification and treatment of offenders and laid down certain principles. This committee in 1980, right, in 1980 the committee known as the Mullah and Iyer Committee was set up on jail reform under the chairmanship of Justice A.N. Mullah. The basic objective of the committee was to review the laws, rules and regulations, keeping in view the overall objective of protecting society and rehabilitating offenders. The Mullah Committee submitted its report in 1983. In 1987, the Government of India appointed the Justice Krishna Iyer Committee to undertake a study on the situation of female prisoners in India. This committee, headed by Justice Krishna Iyer, recommended the induction of more women in the police force in view of their special role in tackling women and child offenders. Now, what have been some of the subsequent developments since the Model Prison Manual was brought out? Following a Supreme Court direction in 1996 in the case of Ram Murthy vs. State of Karnataka to bring about uniformity nationally of prison laws and to prepare a draft model prison manual, a committee was set up, right? A committee was set up, basically. The jail manual drafted by the committee was accepted by the central government and circulated to state governments in late December 2003. So it took 7 years, but at last the jail manual was circulated. As in the case of the recommendations of the National Police Commission 1977, which had sought the creation of a State Security Commission and the promulgation of a new Police Act, implementing jail reform recommendations rests with the state. The Home Ministry unfortunately can do precious little if there is no political will on the part of the states to push through both police and prison reforms, and that political will is still lacking. In 1999, a draft model prisons management bill, the Prison Administration and Treatment of Prisoners Bill 1998, was circulated to replace the Prison Act 1894 by the Government of India to the respective states, but this bill is yet to be finalized some 17 years later. In the year 2000, the Ministry of Home Affairs of the Government of India appointed a committee for the formulation of a model prison manual, which would be a pragmatic prison manual in order to improve the Indian prison management system and administration. The All India Committee on Jail Reforms 1980 to 1983, which sat for 3 years, right, essentially the Supreme Court of India and the Committee of Empowerment of Women 2001 and 2002 have all highlighted the need for a comprehensive revision of the prison laws, but the pace of any change has been very, very disappointing, unfortunately. The Supreme Court has repeatedly expanded the horizons of prisoners' rights jurisprudence through a series of judgments, which we will come to in a later module. For now, let's look at some of the relevant provisions of the Prisons Act 1894. Let's start with accommodation for prisoners. The state government shall provide for the prisoners in the territories under such government accommodation in prisons constructed and regulated in such manner as to comply with the requisitions of this act in respect of the separation of prisoners. Right? So, you have the Prisons Act 1894, which lays a huge emphasis on accommodations provided to prisoners. What about temporary accommodation? Well, essentially under Section 7, wherever it appears to the Inspector General of Prisons that the number of prisoners in any prison is greater than can conveniently or safely be kept therein, and it is not convenient to transfer the excess number to some other prison, or whenever from the outbreak of epidemic or disease within any prison or for any other reason, it is desirable to provide for the temporary shelter and safe custody of any prisoners. Provision shall be made by such officer and in such manner as the state government may direct for the shelter and safe custody in temporary prisons of so many of the prisoners as cannot be conveniently or safely be kept in the prison. So let's assume there is a health outbreak, there is a sort of epidemic outbreak or something like that within a prison, right? Prisoners should also be provided temporary accommodation. So lots of thought has gone into the aspects of the Prison Act here. Okay, now under Section 24, prisoners are to be examined on admission. What does that mean? Whenever a prisoner is admitted into prison, he shall be searched and all weapons, right, shall be taken from him, and also prohibited articles. Every criminal prisoner, okay, shall also, as soon as possible after submission, be examined under the general or special orders of the medical officer, who shall enter or cause to be entered in a book to be kept by the jailer, a record of the state of the prisoner's health and of any wounds or marks on his person, the class of labor he is fit for, right, if sentenced to rigorous imprisonment. So you see, very comprehensive, very, very comprehensive, okay? And any observations, right, that the medical officer seeks to add, he is free to add, okay? In the case of female prisoners, the search and examination shall be carried out by the matron under the general or special orders of the medical officer. Now, we come to section 25. What about the personal effects of prisoners? All money or other articles in respect or whereof no order of a competent court has been made, and which may rather with proper authority be brought into the prison by any criminal prisoner or sent to the prison for his use, shall be placed in the custody of the jailer, essentially, right? The personal effects of the prisoner shall be placed in the custody of jailer, provided it is appropriate for him to use it, okay, essentially. The removal and discharge of prisoners now, that's section 26. All prisoners previously, right, to be removed by any other prison, right, essentially, shall be examined by the medical officer. Prior to being removed to any other prison, so these prisoners should be examined by the medical officer. So essentially, if you're transferring them from Yerawada jail to Arthur Road jail, right, the medical officer must examine them. Right? No prisoner shall be removed from one prison to another unless the medical officer certifies that the prisoner is free from any illness rendering him unfit for removal, right? Moving somebody from one place to another, from one prison to another, is cumbersome. It can also take a toll on the prisoner's health. Therefore, the prisoner must be fit for such movement or removal. Essentially, he should be fit to travel. That's what that section is trying to say. It also says that no prisoner shall be discharged against his will from prison if labouring under any acute or dangerous distemper, nor until, in the opinion of the medical officer, such discharge is safe. So even if the prisoner completes his sentence, right, he may not be discharged against his will if he wants to stay because he feels, right, that he is labouring under some acute distemper, dangerous distemper, or in the opinion of the medical officer, right, such discharge is not safe, right? Only if the discharge is safe. Only if discharge is safe and as certified by the medical officer can the prisoner be released. Now we come to section 27, which deals with separation of prisoners. The requisitions of this act with respect to the separation of prisoners are as follows. 1. In a prison containing female as well as male prisoners, the female shall be imprisoned in separate buildings or separate parts of the same building, in such manner as to prevent their seeing or conversing or holding any intercourse with the male prisoners. Okay, so there are prisons where female and male prisoners are housed. The buildings must be separate. They must be at a safe distance from one another. There must be no interaction between male and female prisoners. In a prison where male prisoners under the age of 21 are confined, right, essentially they must be segregated from the general population, right? Essentially means shall be provided for separating them altogether from other prisoners and from separating those of them who have arrived at the age of puberty from those who have not. So look at how specific the provisions of the Prison Act are. Essentially, if you arrive in prison, right, from the age of puberty, right, you will be separate from those who have arrived in the prison who not at the age of puberty but are still under 21 years of age, and both these classes of prisoners must be segregated from all prisoners who are over 21 years of age. So again, what is the rationale underlying this? Very simple, right? Young minds, and young minds are corruptible, young minds are susceptible, right? And you have young minds interacting with hardened criminals. Any attempt at reforming or rehabilitating them becomes very, very challenging, right? Criminal prisoners who are not convicted, who are under trials, also are to be kept apart from convicted criminal prisoners. So again, under trials should not be kept with convicted prisoners, right? So again, all of this on paper. What does that mean? See, you have under trial, you have not been convicted. So as a rule under the Prisons Act, you must be segregated from those who have been convicted. Also, civil prisoners shall be kept apart from criminal prisoners. Who are civil prisoners? These are prisoners who are in civil prison. Essentially, they are in prison because essentially they have been ordered there under a civil decree, right? Essentially, they failed to essentially keep up some obligation, essentially that is not criminal in nature. Somebody like Subrata Roy Sahara can be considered to be in civil prison currently. So now we come to section 29, the all-important section 29 of the Prisons Act, dealing with the brutal punishment of solitary confinement. So as far as solitary confinement is concerned, the Prison Act says no cell shall be used for solitary confinement unless it is furnished with the means of enabling the prisoner to communicate at any time with an officer of the prison. And every prisoner so confined in a cell for more than 24 hours, whether as a punishment or otherwise, shall be visited at least once a day by the medical officer or medical subordinate, right? So basically, what is this provision saying? That if you are going to confine somebody in solitary confinement, well, you can do so, but there are certain conditions. One such condition, when you are there for more than 24 hours, you must be visited by the medical officer or medical subordinate at least once in that 24-hour period, okay, every day basically, okay. And so if you are in solitary confinement, you also have the right to communicate at any time with an officer of the prison. The cell should be designed in such a way basically, okay. So it's a brutal punishment that's still very much on the statute books, and it's unlikely to go away because prison authorities see solitary confinement as a tool of controlling the prisoners. Those of you who've seen American films will see that solitary confinement is by no means a pleasant experience, okay. All of these films document, right, how prisoners languish in the solitary confinement cells for weeks and months, sometimes even. So essentially the prison authorities are given a lot of leeway under the Prisons Act to keep prisoners in solitary confinement, and the sort of obligatory visit every 24 hours by the medical officer doesn't really serve any other purpose, right? The medical officer must be independent and must be somebody who's strong-willed and who must be willing to take on the jail administration and say that the prisoner's health is suffering and he should be removed from solitary confinement. Now we come to another contentious issue, right? We come to section 30 of the Prisons Act 1894, prisoners under sentence of death. All of you would have seen that in the last couple of years, India has suddenly started executing people again. We've executed Ajmal Amir Kasab, we've executed Afzal Guru, and most recently we've executed Yaqub Memon. Every prisoner under sentence of death shall immediately on his arrival in the prison after sentence be searched by or by order of the jailer, and all articles shall be taken from him which the jailer deems dangerous or inexpedient to leave in his possession. Here's the problem, right? People under a death sentence, their psychology is completely different from people who are there under life in prison or for a period of even 10 or 20 years. Essentially, right, if you are sentenced to life in prison, you will make your peace with the fact that the rest of your life has to be spent in prison. But if you're a prisoner who's on death row, as they say, right, colloquial term, you're a prisoner who's under a sentence of death, there's not much to look forward to. The only thing you really have to look forward to is the gallows, right? And you don't know when your time at the gallows will come. We've had instances in this country of prisoners for 20 odd years languishing under a sentence of death, not knowing their fate, waking up every morning. So the Supreme Court has stepped in this area and said that the president, the executive, must decide all mercy petitions as quickly as possible and carry out the execution if they're going to do so, right? Now, every prisoner under a sentence of death has to be confined in a cell apart from all other prisoners and shall be placed by day and by night under the charge of a guard. So if you're under a sentence of death like Yaqub Memon was in Nagpur prison, basically, right, like Yaqub Memon was, he was placed under the duty of a guard. Essentially, a guard had to take care of Yaqub Memon, right? It is even said that in his final few days, Yaqub Memon was extremely nervous. 24 hours before he was to hang, he started suffering from hallucinations. These things can happen. So essentially, you have to babysit prisoners who are on death row because you don't know how they will react, essentially, right? You know that tomorrow is your last day on this earth, right? That can have a very detrimental effect on your mental health, essentially. Now, Section 31 deals with maintenance of certain prisoners from private sources. This is a very contentious issue in India and is often covered by the media. A civil prisoner or an unconvicted criminal prisoner shall be permitted to maintain himself and to purchase or receive from private sources at proper hours food, clothing, bedding or other necessities, but subject to the examination and to such rules as may be approved by the Inspector General. So the Inspector General of the prison, essentially of prisons, right, can make rules in this regard. But that being said, prisoners do have access to articles of clothing, food, etc., bedding that they can purchase from private sources. So you have more wealthier white-collar criminals who are in prison. You always have somebody like Subrata Roy Sahara, etc., who can easily, financially has much more clout than his fellow prisoners, but he's in civil prison. But this section applies to both civil prisoners and criminal prisoners, and the rules are quite lax when it comes to civil prisoners because at the end of the day, they have not really committed an offense, right? They must be allowed to maintain themselves from private sources. The rules are far more stringent when it comes to criminal prisoners, right? Because everything can be used as a weapon in jail. Do you allow them a razor? Probably not. Absolutely not. Do you allow them a blade? Absolutely not, because these are articles with which they can hurt and injure fellow prisoners, right? So the rules have to be framed by the Inspector General, right? Now, Apart from private sources, it's incumbent upon the jail authorities to supply clothing and bedding to civil and unconvicted criminal prisoners. Every civil prisoner and unconvicted criminal prisoner unable to provide for himself sufficient clothing and bedding shall be supplied by the superintendent with such clothing and bedding as may be necessary. So if you cannot supply yourself with private sources, you don't have the financial capacity to do so, it is incumbent upon the jail authorities to provide it to you. Right? Now, when any civil prisoner has been committed to prison in execution of a decree in favor of a private person, such person or his representative shall, within 48 hours after the receipt by him of a demand in writing, pay to the superintendent the cost of the clothing and bedding so supplied to the prisoner, and in default of such payment, the prisoner may be released. This is a very interesting provision. Essentially, right, under an execution of a decree, right, that's a civil decree, right? What is a decree? Quickly to explain what decree is, that the decree gives expression, it's a formal document which gives expression to a judgment. Okay, let us say there is an action for somebody who has breached a contract, right? Damages are awarded against the party that has in breach of the contract. That party does not pay damages, right? The Code of Civil Procedure allows that party to be sent to jail, essentially. However, the Prison Act simply says that if a private person has asked for this person to be sent to jail for his failure to essentially pay the amount due under the decree, failure to execute the decree in a proper manner, failure to discharge his obligation of the decree in a proper manner, that private person has to provide clothing and bedding to the civil prisoner. If you're sending somebody to civil prison, you as a private party, right, you cannot expect the state, you cannot expect the jail authorities, you cannot expect essentially the state exchequer to bear the costs of that. So you have to bear the costs, and if you, the private person who cannot supply bedding and clothing, then that person will be released by the jail authorities, right? There is no duty on the jail authorities to house civil prisoners, essentially. Okay, and civil prisoners may be employed, right? They may be employed with the superintendent's permission, and they work and follow any trade or profession, essentially. Now, we come to the more contentious issue of employment of criminal prisoners. Somebody like Sanjay Dutt, who is working as a carpenter in Pune's jail, Yerrawada jail. Okay, so section 35, employment of criminal prisoners. No criminal prisoner sentenced to labor or employed on labor of his own desire, except on an emergency with the sanctioned writing of the superintendent, be kept to labor for more than 9 hours in any one day. So what is the upper limit? 9 hours. You cannot work more than 9 hours a day. The medical officer shall from time to time examine the laboring prisoners while they are employed, and shall at least once in every fortnight cause to be recorded upon the history ticket of each prisoner. Essentially, that's a sort of record of the prisoner during his time in prison, employed on labor, the weight of such prisoner at the time. So yeah, often you've seen these movies, old Hindi films, you've seen Sholay and these films like that, where basically you have prisoners who have an axe and they're sort of trying to break stone or quarries and granite and things like that, physical intensive labor. So the medical officer every 15 days must make a noting, he must note their weight basically and see are they healthy, right? And you must step in, essentially, right? Because prisoners are often overworked. Okay, and most of these rules look wonderful on paper, but unfortunately the sad state of India's prisons are that they are not followed to the hilt. So you have all of these safeguards put in, right, in the hope that if they are not followed, essentially there will be sanctions. Now, when the medical officer is of the opinion that the health of any prisoner suffers from employment on any kind of or class of labor, such prisoner shall not be employed on that labor, but shall be placed on such other kind or class of labor as the medical officer may consider suited for him. Medical officer might say, you know what, please, this man is weak, this prisoner is weak, let's move him inside, let's move him into the kitchen, let him do something like peeling of vegetables or something like that, or he could do carpentry work wherein he can sort of work indoors. Yet this kind of physical intensive labor, he is unable to take it because it's taking a toll on his health. Okay, so now we come to employment of criminal prisoners sentenced to simple imprisonment. Okay, we've been talking about employment of criminal prisoners sentenced to rigorous. If you're sentenced to rigorous imprisonment, what does that mean? You have to actually undertake some physical activity. That's the order of the court. That is the order, right? That is the nature of your sentence by the court. Okay, now, provision shall also be made by the superintendent for the employment of those who have sentenced to simple imprisonment. But no prisoner not sentenced to rigorous imprisonment shall be punished for neglect of work except by such alteration in the scale of diet as may be established by the rules of the prison in the case of neglect of such work by a prisoner. So this is pretty draconian provision. Neglect of work, you can actually be denied food, right? This is the problem with the Prisons Act. This is what happens when you still follow an act that was passed in 1894 by essentially an imperialist government, the British government of the day, right? And you don't amend it till 2015, right? It's liable to be abused. Okay, now quickly, we're coming to sick prisoners, right? The names of prisoners desiring to see the medical subordinate or appearing out of health in mind or body shall, without delay, be reported to by the officer in immediate charge of such prisoners to the jailer. So if you're a sick prisoner, right, immediately you have a right to be sort of reported to, and the medical officer should see you as soon as possible. Every prison, hospital, or a proper place for the reception of sick prisoners should be provided, and if it's not provided, as much as possible, as is practically possible, they must be moved to another prison where there is a hospital and there are medical treatment facilities. So what if they have cancer and there are no chemotherapy facilities in that particular hospital? They should be moved to another hospital, essentially. Okay, now what about visits to civil and unconvicted criminal prisoners? Right, there can be due provision made for visits to them. Right, essentially they may see their duly qualified legal advisors without the presence of any other persons, basically. Okay, and now we come to confinement in chains and irons, right? Something that international law now bars whenever the superintendent considers it necessary, with reference either to the state of the prison or the character of the prisoners, for the safe custody of any prisoners, that they should be confined in irons, right? The superintendent may, subject to such rules and instructions as may be laid down by the IG with the sanction of the state government, so confine them. So unfortunately, in 2015, 21st century India, prisoners may still be confined in chains and irons, basically. Okay, now also prisoners under a sentence of transportation, when you're transporting them on one prison to another, may, again subject to the rules, right, be confined by chains and irons, essentially. Right, now Section 58 says the prisoner should not be ironed by the jailer except under necessity. No prisoner shall be put in irons or under medical restraint by the jailer of his own authority except in case of urgent necessity, in which case notice thereof shall be forthwith given to the superintendent. Also under Section 59, there is a power to make rules. The state government may make rules, right, that are consistent with this act. So that brings us to the end of this module. The rights of prisoners is one of those subsets of human rights which is still undergoing development. While India has made tremendous gains with regard to the same, there is much more that needs to be done. The legal framework is present, but its implementation is yet to be done. However, from an academic perspective, the current legal regime is sufficient by itself to handle, if not all, but most of the concerns that prisoners face.